What's going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, Arjun Erigaisi destroys Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave in an absolutely insane game to cinch the deal and win the 2024 WR Masters Cup. Now in the game, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave is playing as white. He opens 1e4, best by test, and Arjun goes e5. Now we have knight to f3 and then knight to f6 for Arjun, so Arjun playing the Petroff Defense in this game. Now from here, we have knight takes e5, d6, knight f3, knight takes e4, and then d4 and d5. So far, both players, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave and Arjun Erigaisi, following the main line of the Petroff Defense. Now from here, bishop d3, and Arjun Erigaisi, he employs the copycat variation with the move bishop d6. So far, Arjun mostly copying Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave in this game. Now we have castles, and then c4 on the board for Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave. His idea is trying to undermine black's pawn on the d5 square. Now Arjun here, he goes c6, a very solid idea. The idea being if white takes on d5, Arjun takes back with the c-pawn, and we have seen this line quite a bit recently, especially by Jan Nepomniachtchi. He played it quite a bit in the 2024 Candidates Tournament, including against the Indian superstar Praggnanandhaa. Now here in this position, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave has a wide variety of ideas that he could employ. For example, rook to e1 and queen to c2 are very, very trendy right now. Instead, he goes for a different idea, knight to c3, trying to increase the pressure on the knight on the e4 square. Now Arjun, he takes on c3, knight takes, b takes, and then he takes on c4, so d takes and bishop takes. And now here in this position, he simply goes bishop f5, a very solid developing idea, and so far we are following established theory. Now from here, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave plays a very aggressive idea. Bishop g5, hitting the queen on the d8 square. Now Arjun plays a very active idea, queen to a5, swinging out the queen along the 5th rank and putting indirect pressure on this bishop on g5. Now here Maxime, he goes knight to h4, a very aggressive idea, and again, so far this is all theory. Here Arjun, bishop e6, defending the bishop. There are no knight takes f5 ideas, but now there is a lot of tension on both the bishop on e6 and the bishop on g5. And here Maxime, he takes on e6, bishop takes e6 on the board, and then Arjun takes on g5, so queen takes g5. Now that bishop on e6 is being attacked, where is it going to go? In the game, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave plays a very interesting idea. First, knight to f3, hitting the queen on g5. The queen moves back to the a5 square, and then again, the bishop still being attacked. So Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave, bishop h3 on the board. A very interesting diagonal for this bishop. You definitely don't see this very often, especially in the open games after e4 and then e5. Now here, Arjun Erigaisi, what is he going to do? Well, the pawn on c3 is undefended. He takes the pawn. Queen takes c3. So now here, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave is playing a gambit. He is down an entire pawn, but in return for that, he does have slightly faster development, a good pawn on d4, and open files on the queen side that he could use to attack Arjun Erigaisi. Now here in this position, there are a wide variety of moves that are playable. For example, rook to c1 is a decent move, but instead Maxime plays the strongest idea, rook to b1, activating the rook on the semi-open b file and putting pressure on b7. And we are almost out of established theory, don't worry. Here Arjun goes b6, and this position was played in the Candidates Tournament, and Praggnanandhaa in this position actually played rook to b3 against Jan Nepomniachtchi. However, in this game, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave goes for a novelty. He plays a move that has never been played before in this position. He goes queen to e2, and in the words of Ajun Mator, as of move 18, we have a completely new game. Now from here, Arjun Erigaisi, he is up an entire pawn here. His goal is to hang on to that pawn, develop his queen side, and prove the extra pawn matters more than white's temporary lead in development. Now here Arjun, he simply retreats the queen back to the a5 square. The queen was very exposed on c3, so queen to a5 on the board. And on a5, the queen does do a great job of patrolling the 5th rank. Now from here, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave, he has to find a way to get an initiative going in the center or perhaps on the queen side. And here there are quite a few very good ideas. For example, rook f to c1 is very good, putting pressure on that pawn on c6 and stopping knight d7 ideas from black. Now instead of that, here Maxime goes for a very active idea, d5, immediately expanding in the center, and this is a temporary pawn sacrifice. Here Arjun can capture on d5 with the queen or with the c-pawn. So what is Arjun going to do? Well, in the game he takes with the c-pawn, c takes d5, a very good idea, and now here Maxime, he has to find the right follow-up. There are a few different good ideas. For example, rook b5 is a very good move, forking both the queen and the pawn on d5, and you will win that pawn back very, very quickly. However, instead, Maxime, he is a madman, and he goes for a madman's move in this position. He jumps forward with the knight, knight to g5. He does not worry about this pawn on the d5 square at all. So what is Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave's idea in this position? Well, here Arjun, he pokes the bear. He goes h6, saying, Maxime, what are you going to do now? And here in this position, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave plays an absolutely insane attacking idea. He literally launches his knight onto the f7 square. Knight takes f7, giving up the knight for the pawn on the f7 square. Now, of course, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave, he's a former top 10, former top 5 player. He's an absolute animal. He knows what he's doing. Here in this position, of course, Arjun is going to take the knight. Rook takes f7, but then Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave will have the option of going bishop to e6 at any moment, trying to pin the rook to the king. So effectively giving up the knight and a bishop for a rook and a pawn. Very interesting idea. Now, I do want to say real fast, the computer does like the idea of delaying this a little bit. It's very complicated, but the move rook to b5, hitting the queen, and intending rook takes d5 next. And it turns out there isn't an easy way for Arjun Erigaisi to get the rook out of his potential pin with the king. Just trust me on that, but if you want to investigate this on your own, by all means, go ahead and do that. Instead here, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave plays the more obvious idea, bishop e6 right away, immediately pinning the rook on f7 to the king on the g8 square. Now we have knight to c6 for Arjun Erigaisi, and here Maxime, he just takes on f7 immediately. So bishop takes, king takes, and then rook to b5 on the board. That move we've been talking about for a very long time. Here, the obvious idea, again, the rook does fork the queen and the pawn on the d5 square. The queen is going to have to move, and then Maxime will be able to win the pawn on d5. Now, the big question here is, where should the queen go? In the game, Arjun Erigaisi goes queen to c3, staying very active with the queen. Of course, that pawn on a2 was being defended, so queen takes a2 is not a possibility. Now here, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave, instead of capturing on d5 right away, he actually goes queen to h5 here, hitting the king, trying to be active with the queen. All right, Arjun, king to f8 on the board, and then rook takes d5 for Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave, winning the pawn, and now he has pressure on this bishop on the d6 square. And now, real fast, let's do inventory. Arjun Erigaisi has 4 pawns, and so does Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave in this position. That means Maxime is down 2 minor pieces in exchange for the rook. Now, the 2 minor pieces are technically a little bit stronger. However, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave does have a very dangerous attack. For example, he is threatening ideas like rook to f5, maybe rook d1 next, and Arjun's king on the f8 square is very, very vulnerable here. All right, Arjun in the game, rook d8 on the board, and now in here, Maxime, rook fd1, piling up more pressure on that bishop on the d6 square. Now, what is Arjun going to do about this pressure? In the game, he actually goes knight to e7, a very interesting idea. The main idea being here, if Maxime takes on d6, then we have rook takes and rook takes. The problem with that is then Arjun Erigaisi will be able to go queen to e1, and that will be checkmate. So, all that being said, rook takes d6 does not work. After rook takes, white cannot take back on d5 again without being checkmated. So, that would be an absolute blunder. Instead here, what should Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave be doing? Well, he has to worry about the defense of the rook on the d5 square, and you have to move it somewhere. And there are a lot of tactical ideas here. For example, if you go rook d3, then the winning move for Arjun is going to be bishop takes h2, and suddenly the king is under check, and you have the discovered attack of the rook on d8 on the rook on d3. So, all that being said, Maxime has to be incredibly careful here with where he puts the rook. In the game, he goes rook b5, a perfectly reasonable move. Of course, there were other squares. For example, rook d2 may be the strongest idea, and for tactical reasons, you actually don't lose after bishop takes h2. The main idea being you can recapture with the queen, and then if black goes rook takes d2, you have the intermediate move queen to f4 check, hitting the king on the f8 square and the rook on d2. I hope you followed that. But instead, of course, after knight to e7, rook b5 was the move from Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave. Now here, bishop c7, offering a trade of rooks. Maxime has to keep the rooks on the board if he wants to attack. And now here, Maxime wants to keep the rooks on the board if he's going to keep the attack going. He tries to do that with the move rook to b3. But here, Arjun, he knows what's up. He simply takes on d1 with check, forcing the rooks off the board anyway. So queen takes d1, and then queen to e5 for Arjun Erigaisi. The big threat now is simply queen takes h2, winning a pawn and opening up the attack against Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave's king. Now the Frenchman, he spots the threat. He simply goes g3, defending on the king side, and here Arjun Erigaisi does the same. He goes king g8, getting his king a little bit closer to safety. Now here, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave, rook to e3, a very strong move. putting pressure on the queen on e5 as well as the knight behind it on the e7 square. Now queen to c5 defends both the queen and the knight on e7, and here Maxime, queen b3, putting pressure on the king on the g8 square. Now king to h8 on the board and queen to e6. Again, Maxime putting more and more pressure on Arjun Erigaisi's position here. Now this is a very critical position in this game. Here Arjun Erigaisi has to find the right move for the knight. It turns out the right idea is going to be knight to g8, intending knight to f6 next. However, instead of that, here Arjun goes knight to f5, in time pressure, finding this move instead. His idea is to put pressure on that rook on the e3 square. However, Maxime is ready. He just goes rook to f3, keeping the rook very active and pressuring the knight on f5. And now Maxime is starting to fight back in this game, and he may even have a little bit of an edge here. All right, knight to e7 on the board for Arjun, and now rook to f8 for Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave, putting the king in check. And then after king to h7 from Arjun Erigaisi, of course, there are going to be more threats along this diagonal here, and Maxime takes full advantage of that. He goes queen to e4, hitting the king once again. Arjun goes knight to g6, trying to block the check, and trying to get a little mini fortress with the pawns and the knight on the king side. Now, rook to e8 for Maxime, getting the rook out of the attack of the knight and the queen here. And then we have bishop to e5 from Arjun. The idea being he wants to go bishop f6, again bolstering this fortress on the king side with the bishop, the pawns, and the knight. All right, here Maxime, he goes rook to e6, a very solid idea, but now Arjun, bishop f6 all the same, and he has his mini fortress. And how is Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave going to break through? Very importantly, if he doesn't manage to break through, then Arjun's pawn majority on the queen side may very well decide the game. All right, here, Maxime, he knows that. He immediately goes for it with the move h4, the alpha 0 pawn in the game. The threat is going to be h5 at some point. Of course, right now, the queen does have that covered. However, Maxime may threaten ideas like rook to c6, for example, trying to deflect the queen from the defense of the h5 square. Now here, Arjun Erigaisi, queen d4, offering the queen trade. Of course, Maxime cannot go for the queen trade. If he goes queen takes d4, then after bishop takes, Arjun Erigaisi's pawn majority on the queen side again is going to decide the game. Those two minor pieces here are just too strong for the rook. All right, now queen to f5 on the board, not going for the queen trade, but then queen to c5 for Arjun, once again, begging Maxime to take on c5 and get the queens off the board. Maxime, again, very politely declines, like the good Frenchman he is, queen to d1 on the board, and then queen d5, threatening the rook on the e6 square. Now rook to e1, but now suddenly, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave, look at his pieces, the queen and the rook are suddenly very, very passive on the back rank, and here Arjun takes advantage of that and just goes h5, expanding on the king side himself, stopping future h5 ideas from the Frenchman. Now rook d1 on the board hits the queen on d5. The queen has to go somewhere. Queen to e6 on the board, and then queen d3 for Maxime. Now from here, Arjun Erigaisi goes queen to g4, trying to keep the queen active, and both sides make a move with their king. King to f1 on the board, and then king to h6. A very interesting idea by Arjun. Now queen d2 check hits the king to h7, queen c2. Maxime trying to stay active with the king, or the queen, sorry, and keeping that knight on g6 pinned to the black king. Now king to h6, stepping out of the check again, or out of the x-ray attack by the queen. And now here, rook d5 from Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave, trying to keep pressure on that pawn on the h5 square. Now we have knight to e5. Arjun, again, with a very good fortress with these minor pieces here, blocking off the rook's communication with that pawn on the h5 square. And now queen d2, it's the king to h7, queen c2, king to h6. And here, instead of repeating moves, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave has the option of going queen d2, king h7, queen c2, king h6, and so on, and it may very well be a draw by repetition. But instead here, Maxime, rook d6 on the board. Now we have queen to c4, hitting the king, and suddenly the queens are forced off the board as the queen on c2 is undefended. So, queen takes, knight takes, and here we have an endgame where Arjun Erigaisi has the two minor pieces versus the rook of Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave, and that is a massive advantage, but of course there is so much work to be done in this endgame to convert it. All right, from here, Arjun's main plan, of course, is going to be pushing those those two pawns on the queen side down the board. Now, from here, rook to c6 on the board for Maxime. Knight d2, it's the king, and here, king to e1. A very strange-looking move. I'm not sure why Maxime did not go king to e2 in this position, trying to keep the king closer to the middle of the board. But instead, king e1 on the board, knight e4, rook c4 hits the knight on e4, then knight to c3. Of course, the knight being defended by the bishop on f6, so rook takes c3, not a possibility. Now a3 by Maxime, and Arjun finally gets his pawns rolling on the queen side. We have b5 hitting the rook. The rook has to move. Rook c6 on the board, but then a5 for Arjun, and now the threat is going to be b4, and then again, b3, b2, b1, trying to promote. All right, Maxime, f3 on the board, king to h7, rook c5, and now Arjun, he goes for it on the queen side with the move b4. This may have been a little bit premature, but it does match his very aggressive playing style. All right, a takes and a takes on the board, and here Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave, he has a very important decision to make. Can he just take that pawn on the h5 square? Well, it turns out he can. Rook takes h5 is the best move, and if he plays that, he's going to have a fighting chance in the endgame, but for some reason here, he goes king d2 instead. Honestly, I'm not sure what he missed. I'm not saying I'm as good as Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave. I just don't really see the idea of this over the move rook takes h5. But if you do know the idea, of course, let me know in the comments section below. All right, here Arjun, he activates the king to g6, defending the pawn on the h5 square. There are no rook takes h5 ideas. Now king d3, knight d1, rook b5, putting the rook behind the passed pawn, very good. But now bishop c3 permanently defends that pawn, and there's nothing white can do about it. All right, king to e2 threatens the knight. Knight b2 gets out of the attack, and here Maxime tries to make something happen on the king side with the move g4. However, here Arjun, he just takes on g4, h takes, then f takes, and then he goes knight to c4, keeping his knight active. And here in this position, Maxime makes his first of a series of mistakes. He goes king to f3, trying to bring his king over to the king side where he can escort those pawns down the board. However, it turns out he needed to keep his king closer to the queen side where it could defend. And here Arjun, he just goes for the move b3. Now, this pawn on b3 cannot be taken. For example, if rook takes b3, the winning move is knight to d2, and that forks the rook on b3 and the king. So what is Maxime going to do? In the game, he goes king to e4, continuing his idea of trying to march his king up the center and then escorting these pawns down the board. However, this was Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave's fatal mistake in this game, and you don't have to give Arjun Erigaisi more than one chance to seal the deal. Here he finds the obvious move, knight to d6, forking the rook on b5 as well as the king on the e4 square, and here in this position, Maxime Vachiere-Lagrave resigns on the spot to Arjun Erigaisi. There's nothing he can do to stop losing his rook on b5 and the game. Wow, what a game by the Indian superstar Arjun Erigaisi. Alright, Chess YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and you want to see me cover more Indian chess superstars like Arjun, Gukesh, and Praggnanandhaa, please like this video. It helps me out so much. Thank you so much for doing that. And while you're at it, check out this video right here where Praggnanandhaa sacks the rook on move 7 right out of the opening against the GOAT, Magnus Carlsen. I'm sure you're going to love that video, so check it out. And I'll see you in the next video.